Hey friends, welcome to our March watercolor subscription box tutorial. My name's Emma LaFave, and today we are going to be taking a look at our March watercolor subscription box and painting this beautiful pot of succulents. So let's jump right in and get started. Okay, welcome to our March watercolor subscription box tutorial. Today we are going to be painting some succulents in a pot, so let's jump in, see what's in this box. Okay, so here we have our card with what we are painting, and then on the back your information. Then when we take a look inside, you should have your free gift, which is just this little water spray bottle to activate your paints. I use mine all the time. I find it super easy and helpful to activate your paints, so we'll fill that up with water in a little bit. You should have 2 brushes, a size 10 filbert and a size 4 cat's tongue. Your watercolor half pans in 4 new colors. The colors we have today are Van Dyke Brown, Dioxazine Violet, Turquoise, and lastly, permanent dark green. You should be supplied with some tracing paper, a template of what we are painting today, as well as your 100% cotton watercolor paper. In addition to these supplies, get out your watercolor tin to add your new colors to your palette. You will need a pencil and an eraser, maybe a pen to outline your sketch, water and paper towel, and now we are ready to go. Okay, so now that our paints are in our palette, we can start by getting to know our supplies, our paint colors that we can mix, as well as our brushes, what kind of strokes they can make. So let's take our little water bottle here, and I just filled mine with water, and I'm just gonna spray my paints to get them all nice and activated. And again, if you would like to cut the paper like we did last time, you could always use front and back so you feel like you're not wasting it. It's totally up to you. I think this time I'm just gonna do all my practice swatches of the colors and then the brush strokes on the same paper. Even if you feel more comfortable using some cheaper watercolor paper to practice your color mixing and your brush strokes on and then save this for later, you can always do that. Totally up to you. But for now, let's get to know our supplies. Okay, so I'm going to start by using my size 4 cat's tongue brush. And a cat's tongue brush, as you can see, has this point to it. But if you turn it to the side, it's flat. So it's fatter when it's laying down flat like this, and then you turn it to the side, it's a little bit smaller and it comes to a really nice sharp point. So it's a lot of fun to use. It's great for detail, but it also makes some fun shapes. We will get into that, but I'm just going to use this one to start mixing our colors. Okay, so let's start by making sure our brush is nice and wet, our paints are wet, and we're just going to swatch our 4 colors so we know exactly what we are dealing with. So there's our Van Dyke Brown, our violet, which I love. You guys know that's usually in my go-to palette. Turquoise. It's a beautiful blue. And then lastly, our permanent green dark. So looking at this palette and kind of looking at our painting, this is a very green heavy painting, but it's funny because we only have 1 green in our palette. So that means we are going to be mixing a lot of different greens using these 4 colors. So I'm going to start by taking my green from my palette. I'm just going to move this over a bit, putting it into different sections in my palette, in my mixing wells. And we're going to get to know how many different greens we can make. Okay, so I'm going to wash off my brush. Let's start by mixing it with a little bit of brown. So you can mix it with a lot of brown or a little brown. Have the amounts of color vary just to see what different tones you can get. So mixing it with a little bit of brown makes this really nice kind of earthy brown color, which I like. You can add a little bit more green so it's not such a brown green and it just makes it a slightly different shade. Or you can mix more brown to it and make it more of like a really kind of greenish brown color. Okay, totally up to you. Okay, so let's mix a little bit with our purple. This is one of my favorite mixes to make. Okay, so that's really purple heavy, but adding that little bit of green kind of gives you this really nice dark dusty purple. If you mix these two colors half and half, you get kind of like a grayish color, like this. Similar to that. It's a bit more purple heavy, but it's kind of like a purpley gray. And then if you mix more green than the purple, you get a really nice dark grayish purple, or purpley greenish. You know what I mean. You know what I mean. You get a nicer dark green. That's what I'm trying to say. My words are gone today, just in time for this tutorial. Perfect. Okay, let's mix a bit of our turquoise with our blue so we can get a nice, look at that vibrant, that's almost like a sea blue. That's pretty. Let's give it a bit more blue to see what that looks like. Then let's give it a bit more green. And then if you feel like it, you can start adding some more of the other colors in there. Maybe you want to mute this a bit. You can just take a little bit of your brown, throw it in there. See what other kind of green you can make. Okay. You could take a little bit of your purple and throw it into your brown one here. See what kind of color this makes. This makes a really nice dark brown. Okay. So play around with your colors, mix them together, and see what you can get. So for our painting today, we are going to be mixing some of the dark purpley greens. So using a lot of the violet mixed with the green for this darker purple one. We're going to be using half and half of the green and the purple to make this gray color for the pot. If you wanted to change it up and do like a straight purple or even the blue, you can take this and, you know, create your own. It does not have to be exact. For our little succulent here, we're going to do kind of a mix of the purpley and the green with a little bit of the blue. And then back here we have that kind of brownish green mix. And then right here we just have kind of a lighter value of that light green and brown kind of mixture. So we're going to be playing around with values and all the color mixtures. And that's about it for color mixing. Okay, so now let's get to know our brushes a bit better. We played around with this just a bit to make our swatches, but let's just take this color and see what kind of lines we can make. So we have our size 4 cat's tongue. I'm just going to take any color, and I want you to start by just using really light pressure to see how thin you can make your lines. Then press down to medium pressure, so not all the way to the belly, but about halfway down. See what kind of lines you can make that way. You could even go up, just practicing different strokes. Then I want you to press all the way down. See how thick you can make it. So it's slightly thicker. You can see it has that nice point. Then you can even try and do a little short, light to heavy to light pressure. So light, heavy, light, and see that kind of leaf shape you get. If you lift it up abruptly at the end, so light, heavy, and then lift up, you get kind of this rounded edge here, which is pretty cool, like a teardrop shape. You can also turn this brush on its side, so it's not flat, but on its side, and see the lines you can get that way. You can do your light to heavy to light to heavy to light to heavy that way. Or you can do it the flat way, light to heavy, see if it's any different. Okay, just kind of get to know this brush. Try curving it when you're doing your pressure stroke. See what kind of curves you can get. These are really great for florals, even though we're not doing florals today. This is going to be a great brush for you to use for other projects on the side. Like I love doing leaves with them. Actually, the brushes in this box are really great for florals, even though that's not what we're doing today. Part of me is like, should I have done florals for this? But you know what? Maybe we can use it for other things in the future. Like, look at those leaves. You could do a nice loose rose with this one. See what else you can paint. Just get to know your brushes. It's almost easier to make like a rose shape with this brush than a round brush. The cat's tongue is pretty great for that because it kind of emulates a round brush to an extent. So it's a lot of fun to use. And you get this great tip. This point is insane. So that's a lot of fun. Okay, now let's take a look at our filbert brush. And our filbert brush, like this is another one of my favorite new brush shapes. You guys know that I'm all about the round brushes and I love them dearly. They will always be my go-to, but this is a really fun brush shape as well, especially again for florals. But let's start off with just getting to know our brushes. Start by making some maybe thick lines, seeing how thick you can make it. This is great for a wash brush as well. If you're doing like a heavy background and like blending it out, you could do a nice background like this because it's big enough. This is a big filbert. But then you can also turn it on its side. So we have the flat side and then we have the thin side, and you can just use it vertically and get super thin lines as well. And then what if you give it a bit more pressure on its side? If you look at it on its side, it almost looks like it could be, sorry, I don't know if you can see that. It could be a round brush, right? So you could use this kind of as a round brush. Give it a little pressure. So the light pressure, heavy pressure, light pressure, you get beautiful leaves this way. Okay, and then let's do it flat. I'm gonna grab some purple. Okay, and you can do light pressure, heavy pressure, light pressure. See, you can get these really cool, large, ovally kind of shapes. One thing I do like doing with a filbert, which is fun, is like an effortless heart almost. So you can go lift up. It's like almost like a perfect heart, which is pretty cool. And then you can also make some really beautiful petals with this brush. Just mix this all together. So you can do your heavy light pressure and you can just twist it and lift it up. Just practice twisting your brush as you lift it. Okay, that didn't work out so well. Keep practicing. You can even just put it on its side to get the smaller petals, like that. Okay, and then you can make it thicker. You kind of like swoop it to the side to get these cool petal shapes. But these are really great for flowers as well, like a anemone or even like a peony. You can make some really cool shapes. So just play around and practice. See what these brushes can do, how you can use them in today's tutorial, but in future tutorials, because you guys have these brushes now. They're yours, right? So see what you can do with them. See what kind of like small little marks you can make. And just experiment and have fun. Okay, now that we've gotten to know our supplies, I'm just gonna go over a technique that we're gonna be doing a lot in this painting that I really want you to know. Okay, so you can even just flip over the back of your paper if you want. We're gonna be doing some blending. So I want you to pick any of these colors, and we're gonna be doing this a lot with the succulents. And you're just gonna create a shape. Okay, I'm gonna create like a leaf shape. Just to start, let's create a couple. Different colors. Okay, nothing special or fancy. We're just going to be working on creating shadows by blending. Okay, so you start off kind of with this like medium or light wash. Like so. And then you're going to let this completely dry. And we'll come right back. Okay, so then once your shape or your petal, whatever you're painting, is completely dry, you're going to create some shadow and blend it out. So you're going to take a slightly darker value of the color that you use. So we use this kind of purple and green mixture. I'm just going to create a bit more of it. Okay, and all you're going to do is you're going to place that dark mixture at the base or wherever you want the shadow. So we're doing some wet on dry. This is dry. I'm going to place my shadow there. And yeah, that looks kind of crazy, right? And then all you're going to do is you're going to wash off your brush, tap it on your paper towel, just to get that excess water off. And you're just going to touch the edge and just use this really light pressure to kind of move that pigment up a little bit. And then you're just going to touch the edge, go over the whole thing to blend it out so it's a softer edge. Now, if it's still kind of harsh, go back and just softly, like really, really light pressure, start to bring that color up. If you feel like you're bringing too much color up, wash off your brush, dry it again on your paper towel, touch the edge and just gently bring it up. So you can have this dark to light gradient, this nice smooth transition from a shadow to the tip. Okay, let's try again with the next color. Okay, we have our darker value. You're going to see we do this in the succulents, so I'm going to place it here at the bottom like this. Wash off my brush, okay, and I'm just rinsing it off just by swishing it around. Tap it on my paper towel, take off that excess water, and just gently start moving it. I left it a little bit too long, it started to dry. Up. We can kind of go back over, put our dark color back there. Again, wash, dry, and blend it up. This is also the back of the paper, so it's not working out the best, but you kind of get the gist, right? Okay. And because the whole thing's still wet, if you want to deepen that color a bit more, you can just tap in some of the darker color to the base. Okay. Now this is happening. And the reason why this is happening, that separation, is because this little area here is more wet than the rest of the petal. So if this happens, this is okay. It just happened to me. I'm going to wash off my brush, just tap it gently on my paper towel, and I'm going to go over the whole thing. Just wet up the whole thing again. Okay. And if there's a lot of pigment, you can always take your paper towel and just kind of take some of it off. Then I'm going to go back in with my darker color again, and we're going to try again. Okay, so we're placing that dark color. Just got to make a bit more at the base. Okay, and we try to want to make it a little bit more of a smooth transition by making sure the water is distributed evenly. So I'm just going to bring that up a bit more. Bring some of that color up. Now we don't want it to the tip, so wash off my brush again, dry it on my paper towel, and bring it up. Okay, and that should dry a bit more evenly. Okay, and then the last time I'll just show you one more time. Okay, our dark color here, nice and dark. Wash, dry, and bring it up. You're not scrubbing too hard. Like I said, it's very gentle. Just slightly bringing it up. Wash off your brush again, dry it a bit with clean water up to the top. Then you can kind of go back, blend it together to the base. Okay, now I don't want you to worry too much. It doesn't have to be a perfect gradient, because if you look at the card, you know, we're going to be doing some textured lines there and kind of covering it up. We just kind of want this base of a gradient of a dark to light area. But if it's not perfect, don't worry, we're doing some texture over it. And that's about it. Okay, so now let's jump into the painting. Okay, so now that we have gotten to know our supplies, let's get into our painting. So you should have some tracing paper. You should also have the image. So you're gonna place the tracing paper on top. If you want to only use half of it, you can totally do that as well. That might be a little bit easier. You can always cut your tracing paper to use the other half for another time. Then you can even take your washi tape from last month's box. If you don't have that, you can just use regular tape. We're just gonna secure the tracing paper onto the image just so it doesn't move around while we're tracing it. Okay, so now I'm just going to take a pen. You can use a pencil, whatever you have, and I'm just going to trace around the image so we can know what we are going to be transferring on to our watercolor paper. Okay, so now that we have our image on our tracing paper, you're going to flip it around to the back side, and you are going to take your pencil and you are just going to scribble all over the image, making sure you get all of the lines. Okay, so now you are going to flip that back around, Place it on top of your watercolor paper, like so. Tape it down again. I might even secure it a little bit more. And now you're just going to take your pencil or your pen and you're going to go over the image again. This is going to press down all of that graphite onto your watercolor paper just in the parts that you are going over. Now the reason why I like to use a pen and then a pencil is because when I go back over the image, it's easier for me to see where I have already traced over. So the original drawing here is done with pen, and now I can see, just because it's darker using the pencil, that like which sections I have already gone over. You can always just use a pencil no matter what, but you always need a pencil to do this, just to transfer that graphite onto it. But if you feel comfortable tracing it with a pen, it might be easier to see where you have already drawn and where you haven't. Some people have also asked if I have a specific pencil for doing this. I'm just using a Tombow pencil, but I've done it with like a cheap mechanical pencil before too, and that seems to work just fine as well. I don't know if it really matters too much what pencil you're using to transfer, but you could always try it out and let me know. So far I haven't had anyone that hasn't worked. So just give it a go, see what you got. Okay, and you can just flip it back. Make sure that you can see your little sketch there. I know it's almost impossible to see here. It's so light because of my lights, but hopefully you can see your sketch, and then we can take our tracing paper off and begin our painting. Okay, so I did decide to go over it a little bit darker with my pencil just because you guys, I wanted to make sure that you could see it. If you find that your graphite's not transferring as well, you might need to do the scribbling on the back a little bit harder just to make more of the graphite on the back be a little bit thicker to transfer. But just keep trying different things. And if you're getting a really, really light outline of a sketch, that's ideally what you want. I mean, you want to be able to see it for you, but you don't necessarily want to see it underneath the painting. We want to have it as light as possible so we don't see those pencil marks. Okay. So let's begin. We're going to start by painting the pot. We're going to be painting a gray color. Okay, so let's make sure our paints are nice and wet. You can activate them with your spray bottle again. If they've already dried, just a little spritz here and there. Okay, and we're going to mix that gray color. So remember, if you want to look back at your mixing chart, or not your mixing chart, but your page of like mixes, I also suggest, if you can't remember the mixes, you can always label them when you're color mixing. It's great for a reference when you go back. So we're going to take our purple, and then we're going to take our green, and half of this should make a gray, like so. Okay, you can even throw in a little blue if you like to make it more of a bluey gray. Totally up to you. All right. And then we're just going to start with a really light wash. So I'm just taking off some of that pigment on my brush so it's not too dark. And I'm just going to start by going over the whole pot with this really light wash. And then we're going to, and I'm using my filbert brush for this just because it's a larger area. Okay, and I want to start with the lightest value possible. Not possible, but pretty light, because there's going to be a bit of a highlight area here, and we're just going to move in some of those shadows. Okay, if it's easier to get into some of those corners with your cat's tongue, you can always switch to that if it feels more comfortable. Okay, and we want it all nice and evenly wet. Because we're going to go back in with some darker pigment. Actually, let's get down here too. Okay, so make sure it's all nice and wet. I'm just going to go over the whole thing with water again, because when we add our darker color in, I want to make sure that it blends nicely. I don't want there to be any areas that have already dried. And if you feel like you have too much water on your brush, you can always just tap it on your paper towel a bit, and then just take some of that off. Okay, now let's get some more of that color, and we're going to bring it over here around this side and then down. You can kind of just keep bringing it closer. So we're going to have a highlighted area here. So we can go a little bit darker this way too. Make it a little bit darker down here. Grab more and just kind of intensify it. Just kind of bring it over. And I'm going to make sure it's dark underneath these succulents, because the succulents would cast a bit of a shadow as well on the pot. And then if you feel like you have too much of a line there, a harsh line, wash off your brush, dry it on your paper towel like this, and then you can just blend it softly out just by using really light pressure. Just graze over it and it will blend. Okay, and we can intensify that even more on another layer. So let's leave that, just because I don't know how much more we can layer while it's still wet. I may actually, like, there's some areas down here I feel like I can just get in a little bit better with my cat's tongue. Like so. Okay. I didn't even paint that well inside the lines today. That's fine. It happens. Okay, so let's leave that part to dry and we can start on some of our succulents. Okay, so because I don't want to just wait for this to dry to work on the succulents, I think I dropped some water there, of course, because that's what I do all the time. I'm just going to smooth it out with my brush, dry it off my brush and just smoothing it out. Let's work on a succulent that's not touching any of this wet area. So I'm going to work on this one back here, and I want to create a really light wash of this green. I'm going to mix a tiny bit of purple into there. A little bit more green. Like so. And I'm going to have a light wash because I have more water in here. I didn't pick up a lot of paint, and I just had a decent amount of water on my brush. If you ever feel like you might have too much water on your brush, always just tap it on your paper towel just to take off some of those extra drops that might be kind of lingering in there. And then that should help with water control. And we're just going to go over this succulent back here. And I'm just going to add a little bit of water to my brush because I want it to be a little bit lighter. And I also want to keep it as wet as possible because we're going to drop some brown in there. And I want it to bleed nicely, and I don't want it to be dry. So I just keep adding a little bit of water to my brush. Just dunking it just a little bit, just the tip. And it's okay if it's like pooling a little bit on this back succulent. Because you can just move that water around. You want it to all stay wet. I'm gonna add a little bit more green, I think, to this. Okay, you can just throw some green in there because it's still wet. We're working fairly fast, just so it doesn't dry too much. I'm gonna dry off my brush, and I'm just, or wash off my brush, dry it a little bit, and I'm just gonna just move some of that color around, keeping it all nice and wet. Then I'm gonna grab some of my brown, and I'm just gonna kind of touch little parts of the base, just a little bit, just throw some brown in there. You can throw some on the tips. And this doesn't have to be too detailed or perfect in any way. Okay, so there we go. We have this interesting looking succulent. Okay. So now I want you to take a look at other things that are not touching any wet areas. See if this is still wet. We could probably get away with starting Actually, you know what? Just to be safe, let's make sure everything's dry before we continue. Okay, now that everything's dry, we're gonna work on these two. So I'm just gonna grab, I'm still using my size 6. I'm going to make this kind of deeper green color by mixing my green into this brownish thing that we have. It's a green and brown mixture. Okay, and I'm just gonna wash a little bit off my brush, and I'm just gonna go fully over the whole plant. Okay, we're just going to start by doing a first layer. And it's not like, I don't want you to do the darkest value of this color, but it's kind of like a medium one. This actually feels a little too dark, so instead of like mopping it up and starting again, I'm just going to continue to add water to my brush instead of paint, just to kind of spread out the paint that's on here and on my brush. So I can just take some of that paint, just bring it over. Okay, and a lot of this piece is about working in layers. So you don't have to go too fast. We can kind of take our time, allow some drying time, get yourself a tea if you have to wait for things to dry. I love this brush for just getting around in some of those tight little areas. So I just keep adding water to my brush to just expand the paint that I already have on my paper and on my brush. If it's too light, then you can definitely add a little bit more paint. You just kind of want a medium wash over the whole thing as a base to start. Okay, so there's that one, and we're gonna let that completely dry and then work on it in layers. So while that's drying, let's do this one. Now we're gonna do the same kind of purple and green mixture. So purple, because this one's a bit darker, and green. This one's a little bit more purple heavy. But I still want some green in there. So mix until you get kind of the desired color. And I'm going to take some off of my brush, and I'm just going to go over it to start with our light wash or medium wash of it. Okay, covering the whole thing as our base coat for our layers. I apologize if you can hear a silly baby downstairs. I don't know if you guys can actually hear that in the microphone. I always worry. My son is up and he's just chatting away, but sounding a little bit like a gremlin downstairs. This is the real life and reality of not having an office. But I feel like that's what you guys love about me, right? You love hearing the realness of my house? Maybe? Maybe not. I don't know. Okay. So there, we have covered the area. Doesn't have to be too smooth, don't worry about it. And we're gonna let that part dry. So we're gonna let all of this dry before we do any more detail on that. And then we're gonna do the same kind of thing here. We're gonna cover this with a layer, and then, yeah, so let everything here dry, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so let's fill in this succulent with our base color. Before we move on. So we're going to do the same kind of color. I'm just going to make this a little bit more green, and then I'm going to also add some blue in there. Just a little, I'm just adding it from my mixing wells. Okay. Just going to add it all over. And the reason I create the base for each of these succulents first is just because it's easier for me to build shadows on a color that's there already. Especially if you really want to deepen those colors. I'm going to add just more water so it's a bit lighter. We don't want it too dark. Okay, just try and move all that pigment that you have around. Okay. Just gonna lift up some of that color. I don't want it too dark. And if it seems like some areas are drying already, you can just kind of wet it and just try and distribute the water evenly all over, just so it doesn't dry with some weird marks. There we go. Okay, so we're gonna let that one dry, and we can start with some of the detail on our other ones that are not necessarily touching too much. Okay, so let's start with this back one because I feel like it looks a little bland. Okay, so I'm gonna start and just grab a little bit of this brown greenish color and just use the tip of my brush, and I'm gonna just add a little bit of a darker line on one side, and then you can even do like a little kind of, what's it called, vein along the center. If you want, you can add that detail. You don't have to add that detail. You can keep it the way it is. Totally up to you. You could even just slightly darken maybe one side, just to give it a little bit more depth. Just adding a light wash of that kind of turquoisey, kind of bluish color. Like so. Okay. And then let's do this one. So this one, I want the base of all of these to be darker and then gradually kind of lighten. So we're going to work on one section at a time. We don't want them to be wet, working on two wet ones together at the same time. We got to let some drying time in between. So I'm going to just take this brownish green color, a little bit more brown heavy, and I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to start by adding this dark brown to the base here, like that, and then I'm going to wash off my brush, dry it, and I'm just going to blend it out. So it's nice and dark there, okay? And we can actually even make it even a little darker, because this one is behind this one in front, so I kind of want to give it a bit more of a shadow. Like that. Wash off my brush, dry it a bit, blend it out. Okay, now let's skip this one and do the next one. Same kind of thing, grabbing your greenish brown color, applying it. So remember, this is already dry. We're doing some wet on dry. Placing that shadow there. Wash off your brush, dry it a bit, and blend it out. Okay, if you want to go back in, because now it's all wet and you can just tap in a bit more shadow, you can do that. I'll wash it off, blend it out here. Okay, gotta mix a bit more the color in my palette. Sorry if you couldn't see that. A bit more brown, a bit more green. Okay, let's do this one. Adding that darker color. Wash off my brush, dry it, blend it out. And when I say dry, I'm just tapping it on my paper towel so there's not like drips of water coming off of it. It's still damp, it's still a little wet, not completely dry. Just doesn't have all that excess water. And then that looks still a little bit light, so I'm just going to grab a bit more color, but because it's all wet still, I can just kind of tap it in there. Like so. And then let's do the last one over here. Wash it off, blend it out. This could be a bit more intense, I find. A bit more. Like so. Okay, and then that's pretty harsh, so I need to wash off and blend it out again. Okay. So we're going to leave that section to dry, and then we'll come back and do the ones in between. Now let's do this one. This one's the same kind of thing that we're doing, just with our purpley mixture. So let's Grab some purple. Let's grab some green. Okay, nice and dark. Let's start with the ones here towards the back. And I'm going to go add this darker color in right at the base. Okay, the shadow is towards the base. Wash off my brush. Dab it on my paper towel. Blend it out. Okay, and then we can't do one that's beside it because it will bleed together. If you feel like you drag too much of that darker color where the shadow is to the tip, you can always just wash off your brush and kind of lift up that color so it's a little bit lighter towards the top. But now we're going to do the only one that's not touching any others. Grab our color like this, and I really want the tips to kind of remain lighter, so I'm really going to wash off my brush here. Just tap it. Dry it off, and I'm not going to bring too much of that shadow to the top. I want them to remain lighter. I want the shadow to really be at the base. This will help with the contrast of when the shadow is behind the tips of these ones. Excuse me. I'll grab a bit more color and just kind of tap it in the base here. Like that. Okay, so let's let that one dry. And while that's drying, we can also start on this one. This is kind of like multitasking, right? We just kind of go from succulent to succulent. So let's grab our other mixture. So green, maybe a bit of brown, maybe a bit more green, a little bit of purple. Okay. And I'm going to just start by doing the first initial 3 right here. That's a bit too dark. I'm just going to take off some of that pigment on my paper towel there. Just going to kind of move it around. And just do these 3 right here. And I'm just going to tap in some darker right at the center. Okay. Now we need to choose 3, or the petals, or whatever they're called for succulents, because I don't know, that are not touching any wet parts. Okay, so let's choose maybe one of these bigger ones back here, because even this one, the base is going to touch there, and I don't want the colors to bleed. So I'm going to grab a little bit more purple, a little bit more green. All right. So there's 2 ways to do this. We can do it the way we've been doing. Or if you feel more comfortable, there's 2 ways to blend out color like this. You can take your brush just clean and wet and then go over the whole area that you're about to layer on. Wet it up like this. Make sure it's not pooling like crazy. You can just dab your brush on your paper towel. Take some of that color up, and then you can just take your color and tap it into the base where we want that shadow, like so. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to wash off my brush because that's a pretty harsh shadow. Dry it off a little bit, and then just kind of blend it out. Bringing it closer to the tip, but not completely. Just blend it out. Little circles, gentle, gentle, gentle. And then before I move it to the tip, because I don't want it to go up to the tip, I'm just going to take off some of that pigment on my brush onto my paper towel, and then again, just blend it out. So whatever method works better for you, you can do. You can do how we did here, where we just did some wet on dry, and then kind of blended it out with a bit of water and some clean water and really light pressure. Or you can wet up the whole area and then tap it in and then blend it out. It's totally up to you. Try both and see what works. Okay, so let's pick another one. I kind of like the method of placing it in the shadow first on a dry surface. I don't know why. I just more used to that, I think. And then wash off your brush. And then kind of blend it out. And if you're carrying too much of that darker pigment, again, to the tip, wash off your brush, dry it off a little bit, and just touch the littlest bit of it to drag it. So you're not taking a ton of pigment to the tip, if that makes sense. Okay, and then let's do the other one over here that's not touching anything that's wet. And again, if it feels more comfortable to turn your paper to get a better angle, you can do that too. There are no rules to whatever works. Wash it off, dry it, blend it out. Okay, like so. All right, now there's no other really petals on this one. I call them petals, I don't even know if they're petals, that aren't touching something wet. So we can go back up here if these are already dry, which they are, and we can continue. So I'm gonna do this one first because that one I just did and it's a little wet. Grab our brown. Now we do want a little bit of separation of color between these two, so the ones on either side. So I'm gonna deepen it in just a second. I'm just gonna wash off my brush, blend it out a bit. So what I might do, I might add, I'm gonna mix a bit more color. So we have our green and brown, and then add a little bit of purple just for a bit more darkness. That's a lot of purple. Hold on. Balance it out again. A little bit of brown. Okay, and I'm just gonna add a little bit of purple to this one, just so it's a little bit deeper in color. So there's a separation between those sections. Okay, let's do this one. Wash off my brush, dry it, blend it out. Again, I'm just going to go back in with just a little bit more darker color to the base. Just so we have that separation in between each section. Wash, dry, blend it out. Okay. And then our last one right here. Wash, dry, blend it out. And go back in and just kind of tap areas you want to just deepen. Okay, and the slightly different bit of color there will also cause a little bit of separation in between each section. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry. And if there's like a little bit of patches and stuff, like we're gonna do some texture on it anyway. If you look at the card, there's some texture, so don't even worry about it. I'm gonna add some texture after. Okay, now let's do the same thing over here. I'm gonna do these two because they're not touching. So let's grab our mix, our green, our purple, okay, and the base. I'm just going around that succulent. Wash, dry just a little bit, and blend. And then again, just add some darker color into that base. Okay, and let's do the other one over here. Wash it off, dry it, blend it out. Go back in with it just a bit darker. And having the shadow right at the tips of these two really makes it pop out. It gives it really nice dimension and depth. Okay, So let those dry. Let's see, are these dry? Yes, they are. So now we can do the next three. Okay, so again, I'm going to place I need a little bit darker of a color here, right at the base of that petal. Wash it off, blend it out. Really want the tips a lot lighter. So the base of each section needs to be a bit darker. Wash, dry, blend it out. Place that shadow in there, wash, dry, blend it out. Gonna go back in just a little bit more shadow right at the base here. And if it's ever too harsh of a shadow, again, just wash off your brush, dry it, and just blend it. Really light pressure. Okay, so those ones are done. Let's do the ones again that are not touching any areas. We can't do these three. We'll just skip to the next. A little bit more green in here. Okay, so let's Okay, so now we're gonna wait for those to dry and all the other ones before we get into a bit more detail and just filling in the last ones. While we're waiting, let's do a little bit of texture and a little bit of deepening that shadow on our pot here. So let's get our colors. I'm just gonna mix whatever's in here. I think it's kind of like a similar color. Remember, it's our purple and our green. Add a little bit of blue for our gray. And we're just going to use our bigger brush again, place the shadow like that, wash off our brush. It's pretty intense, right? And we're just gonna blend it out. Again, same kind of soft motion, just blending it out. Like that, just deepening it a bit. Let's do some on this side. And just blend it out a bit like that. Wash off our brush, dry it, blend out those edges. And if it's not completely like smooth or anything, don't worry. I kind of like this idea of this texture on the pot. If you want to take your smaller brush, I'm just gonna make a bit more color. And if it's never the exact color that you mixed previously, don't even worry about it. Like, honestly, I don't stress too much. It's always going to be close enough. Okay, just play around, and it's kind of nice to have different variations of the color. A little bit of blue. Okay, I'm just going to take some of it with this smaller brush just to get in and around the edge there. Make it nice and dark, and then I'm going to wash off the brush, dry it a bit, and just kind of blend it out. And I'm going to blend down here so we have that separation of the base. I'm just turning my brush on the side to just kind of move that color over a bit. And then there's some pretty harsh lines here, so again, just washing off my brush, drying it, and just kind of blending it. But we're getting some kind of fun dry brush effects. I don't know if you guys are. I don't know if you can see that. It's so hard to see sometimes. I kind of like that look. I'm going to do the same over here. Just deepen the shadow a bit. Wash it off, dry it. Just blend it out. And even down there too. Let's do some down here. Really deepen it down here. Just kind of move it over with the side of the brush. Kind of like a flicking motion. You can blend that out or you can have that texture to it. Totally up to you. Like that. There's a bit of a line here I'm going to blend out. Like so. Okay. But I kind of like when you have this like dry brush texture almost. And if you want to take up like a little bit of the, see if you can pull up some color. Nope. Okay. All right. And then we'll let that dry. So let's let everything dry and then we'll come back, finish our little sections and a little bit more detail. Okay, so let's finish this with some detail. Let's finish these guys right here. I'm just gonna grab our color mixture, just do the last few petals that we're missing, put in those shadows, wash and dry and blend it out. Get a little bit more shadow in there. You can even take a different color just to deepen it. Okay, so that one is done, just for the main layer. And then now with this one, you can take some more green, some more brown, even a little bit of purple if you want to deepen it. And then you can just start doing some cool textured lines if you want. So I'm going to just take my size 6 and just kind of do little lines kind of coming up from the base. Just flicking with my wrist like that. You can even have some little zigzags kind of going down. If you wanted to grab a bit more color and just make it even deeper in the shadow area, for some, you can do that, just for it to stand out a bit more. You can blend it out, you don't have to. Like, it's kind of up to you what kind of look you're going for. Like, this isn't a realistic, detailed painting. It's kind of stylized. It has a little bit of detail, but you can really just kind of go with the flow of whatever you want to do for yourself. Okay, so there's that one. I think if I had to do it again, I might start off a little bit lighter so I can really deepen those shadows. It's pretty dark of a value all the way around, but I mean, it's fine. We have to finish this one. Let's mix our color again. Look at my green. My green is just a mess, but that's okay. Adding in that darker shadow. I'm gonna wash, blend it out a bit. Okay, and then you can just take some more, maybe even darken it up with just a bit more purple. And you could do some darker lines. So start kind of with not heavy pressure, but heavier pressure, and then flick it out to kind of get these little thinner lines. Totally up to you, just coming from the base like that. Okay, so that's up to you if you want to do that. That's a little bit too purpley for me, but that's okay. Maybe I'll blend it out a bit. Add a bit more green. Dull it down a bit. Like that. Okay, and then before we do any detail on this, just to make sure it's all dry, let's take our brown. We're just going to do the soil that would be in here. So you're just going to fill this area with brown. Like there would be some soil in the pot. It's also a nice little touch of like a warmth from this beautiful brown. I like this brown. It's nice. Like that. Nothing to it. Like that. And then again, before we get into this, I wanted to just do one kind of textured thing on the pot here. I'm just going to take my filbert brush again. I'm just going to mix this darker color. And I'm going to do kind of this dry brush technique. So this is pretty wet. I'm only taking a little bit of paint. My brush isn't sopping wet. I'm just going to take it. I'm just going to kind of go around here and I'm just going to kind of swoop it. Now see these lines? Because it's not super wet. Oops, I just touched the soil. My bad. Okay, but you're kind of just, it's running out of paint by the time it gets around here, and you get this really nice texture, just kind of like how I did on the pot here too. So you're just taking a little bit, you don't have a lot of water on your brush or anything, and you're just doing this kind of swooping action, and it just creates this really nice texture that resembles like a cool pottery vibe, if you will. Okay, I just like the way, if you don't like the way that looks, you don't have to do that at all. But I really kind of like that. And then just to get in some of the smaller areas up here, just because it's a little harder to get in there with my filbert, it's going to darken up here just a bit. And I know this is like a harsh line. I'm just going to wash off my brush, dry it a bit, just blend it out. Again, you can even take this brush and do kind of like a dry brush kind of thing to it. Maybe I'd wait until the brown dries for sure, because I keep touching it and it's just bleeding into it a little bit. I might add a little bit more shadow under there once it's a bit more dry. Okay. And I think I'm going to, let's create more of that color. Oh my gosh, my green paint is such a mess. That's because I don't wash in between sometimes. But if you're like me and you work like that, it's okay. All you have to do is just wash off your brush properly and then just swish it around in the color and it goes right back to normal. No biggie. Okay, I'm actually also just going to deepen down here underneath a bit. So I'm just going to take that darker color, deepen it, just so there's a bit more separation. So just putting it under the big initial pot, a little bit more purple in there. Okay, I'm gonna wash off my brush, dry it a bit, and just kind of blend it out just a little bit. I still kind of like that dry brush look on here. Like that. Just bring it over just a little bit. Like that. If you like that, you don't have to. I feel like that might be a bit dark, but that's okay. You can always try and lift up some color. There we go. Just to make it a little bit lighter. And then lastly, I just want to do like a couple lines on these ones right here, just to sharpen them up a little bit. So you can just do, if you want to, and just kind of curve them a bit, just so they don't look too straight. Give it like a little bit of shape and movement to these pieces, these petals. Like that. And if you feel like you want to deepen any shadows, you can always just go back in. You can just keep deepening shadows if you like. Outline it a bit if you want. Again, because it's not a completely like realistic piece or anything. It's more stylized. Does not have to be perfect by any means. The shading doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing does. Just go with the flow. Just keep playing however you like. And then again, like I said, I'm just going to deepen under here. Just so it doesn't look like the succulents kind of blending in too much into the pot, because they're similar colors. We have that purple and green mixture. So I'm just deepening it with some shadow. Wash off my brush a bit, and then just kind of blend it out so it's not too harsh. I can just take my slightly damp brush and just create a bit more texture if I wanted. Like that. And there we go. There is our succulents in a pot painting. I hope you guys really enjoyed that one. Thank you guys so much for purchasing this month's box. I really hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I hope you learned something, and I can't wait to see you guys next month. Have a wonderful day. Bye.